Hello and welcome everyone to my YouTube channel Bloom with Ansa. In today's episode, I'm sitting down with Andrea Bitner. She's an ESL teacher and very passionate advocate for bilingual individuals. She has written a book. She sent me 10 copies of that book. I'm super grateful. I'm going to read this book and I'm going to share the remaining 9 copies with the students at Empowerment Square, my nonprofit organization, where we teach immigrant women survivors of human trafficking English as a second language. Andrea is a powerful advocate, and she says that learning a new language is a gift and that it should be your strength. You must see this as your gift and not as your weakness. Now let's dive into Andrea's work, her experience, the stories that she has encountered over time. She has been in this field for the past 25 years, and that's what makes her an expert in this world. All right, thank you so much, Andrea, and welcome to Bloom with Ansa. I'm so appreciative that you took the time out of your busy schedule and be here with us to have this conversation that our listeners are going to love. I'm sure about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just thrilled to be here.
You're very welcome. And I would like to start with our signature question, which is, what does the word bloom mean to you in your personal and professional life?
I thought about that, and I think that the word to me, bloom, reminds me of what it takes to be patient. And I really thought about when people see a flower that blooms, maybe for the first time, or if it blooms repeatedly over the season, whether it be summer or fall here on the East Coast, all they see is that bloom, right? That beautiful bloom that flower has produced. But what they often don't see is all of the work that it took for that flower to reach that status. And so a lot of things go on, under that soil that are invisible. And that could be the work, that a person does, or the challenges they overcame, or the setbacks that they may have had as it continued to grow to the surface.
Yes.
And to me, blooming is an achievement that has taken a great deal of patience, sometimes sacrifice, definitely grit and time.
Wow, that is such a rich definition of the word bloom, and I'm so proud of myself to have that question for my guests. That gives me a different perspective every time. A beautiful, beautiful definition. So I appreciate you, the way you see, how bloom applies to one's life. That's amazing. Thank you. And the next question is, for our listeners, basically, what do you think our listeners will take away from this conversation today, and how this will change their life?
I hope that the listeners that listen to this conversation today will walk away not only for an appreciation of meeting any person who's learning English in this country or in any country learning any new language, but a better understanding of the grit and work that it took for them to accomplish it. And if they are an English language learner themselves, I hope that they walk away patting themselves on the back and feeling a great sense of pride for the path that they are on in accomplishing the same thing.
Okay, wonderful. So I think I see myself on the both sides. So first of all, I have to pat myself.
You should.
For speaking English, whatever, however good or not so good I speak. But that was my journey. I started my journey, as a non-native English speaker when I came to America. And I thought I did speak English because back home, we read English and we write English. And I thought, okay, if you can read and write, you can also speak. When I came to America and I tried to have simple conversation with people around me, and I felt like I lose my confidence. My vocabulary just goes away because I'm translating, I'm thinking, I'm translating, and I'm talking at the same time. So it's a lot of work for a brain, for any brain. And I felt like other people got an idea, or maybe the notion that I'm not intelligent enough. My ideas are not good enough, or I am not good enough. And then I started to feel about myself that, like, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. I thought I spoke English, but I can't. And then when it came to time to looking for jobs, I started looking for jobs that were like, just with the computers, like in the back office, where I don't have to talk to many people, no front desk job, no nothing. And I said, okay, maybe I should just learn the skills where I can sit behind the computer and do my job, and I don't have to talk. But then I had my ambitions, I had my goals, and I couldn't give up on my dreams. So I was struggling, and then I thought, like, Ansa, I think the key is to learn the language. Why not step up? You already know the basis, like your base is pretty strong. You don't have to worry about grammar as much. You don't have to worry about, learning the basics of the language. All you need is practice and get out of your comfort zone. So that's how my journey started. Do you have any comments about that?
I do. I can connect with you on this idea in a short-term example. As a person who, is born in the United States and my first language is English, I had an experience, two of them that I can share, where I had to speak another language to a group of people in a place where there were no interpreters available. And I had the opportunity years ago on 3 separate occasions to travel to El Salvador. And I've been down there to do some work with different schools and things like that at different times. And I remember preparing for about a year with a friend of mine who is a Spanish-speaking professor to go on this trip. And I remember stepping off of that plane and onto the tarmac, and there were 8 people waiting for me. And I had to speak Spanish. I had no other choice because I was in their country. I was ready to speak their preferred language, and I really wanted to communicate. And I remember that hesitation that I felt as a young, educated teacher, from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with a master's degree and all these checklists of accomplishments. And for the first time in my life, I felt limited because I had probably for the first 2 weeks I was there, about 8 sentences I would speak comfortably in Spanish. But I was a sponge. Every day I was trying to pick up another word. And I remember my brain being so exhausted. At the end of every day, I would get a headache because all day now I was in the shoes of the students that I taught back here in Philadelphia, trying to navigate a new situation, trying to communicate and not feel limited, trying to make new friends. And I thought to myself, I understand the hesitancy that people feel and the inadequacy that I felt for those few weeks I was there because I couldn't share as much as I wanted to. And it was never about a lack of intelligence. Lack of language is never about a lack of intelligence. It's just about giving yourself the time and the opportunities to learn the words for something.
Right.
And so I do remember that experience, and it was very humbling. And it was something I will never forget. And every time I went back there, I would prepare myself for it. And I remember the one day I was there, I was walking down this path with a family, and I heard this person speak English from. I speak English. Do you need a translator? And I was like, yes, because this relief, settled onto my brain. It was like, oh, I don't have to think about that part right now. And so for that brief moment, we had a little conversation, but I also experienced what the relief is when you do feel or hear your first language again, because you don't have to work as hard physically with your brain. So that's one experience. My second experience was just a few weeks ago. I was in a local store and there was a woman in front of me paying for her bill. And the gentleman told her what the total was. And he looked at her and he said, I think your total is $15. And all of a sudden she looked at him with hesitancy. And he said, ma'am, your total is $15. And I realized in that moment she wasn't understanding what he was saying because she possibly spoke another language. So she started to hesitate and he hesitated. And she said to him in Spanish, she said, no English, I don't know English. And so my Spanish side of my brain reactivated for a moment. And I looked at her and he was just staring at her and everybody felt a little helpless. So all of a sudden I just took that risk again. And I was like, I said to her in Spanish, necesitas más dinero para la And I said, and I was trying to think of bananas because I knew she needed more money for the bananas. And I said, platanos, platanos. And she was like, oh. And then I said, y gracias para escuchar mi mal español, which is thank you for listening to my bad Spanish. And we laughed together. But again, the people behind me were confused. The gentleman at the cashier didn't know what to do, and she felt helpless. So again, I was reminded of the risk that you feel when you have to try to speak another language. English is really one of the most unpredictable languages in the world because we borrowed our language from so many other places. And so I believe there are 26 letters in the alphabet, but 144 sound symbol relationships. And so it's so irregular at times.
Yes.
It does make it a very difficult language to learn, especially too if your first language that you read and write in is really far in distance from English, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we think about language distance and, the Romance languages like Spanish and French tend to make the path a little bit easier if you can read and write in your first language, which is important because you have a root to grab onto, which is your first language, just to learn the differences in sounds, right, between English and that first Romance language. But when you're coming from a place where, for example, I have students who speak Mandarin, so they're writing in characters. So, or I have students who speak and read and write in Arabic, right? So when you are in distance that far away from the English language, your journey may be a little bit more difficult to learn to read and write, if especially you cannot read and write in your first language. So I can agree with you there. And I think something that people forget is the amount of time it takes to master the language. It takes about 3 years to master just your social conversation, which is hello, how are you? How was your weekend? Where are you from? Tell me about your family. It takes 5 to 10 years to master your academic content-based conversation and your reading and writing and education. And that's with a consistent practice, right? That's with consistent practice. And there are a lot of, different theories about how long it really takes, but some of the best indicators are really how well can you read and write in your first language? Have you ever had any limited or interrupted education? And even if those things are in place, you can still be very successful in learning the English language because we do it with our students and families over and over all the time.
Yeah. You're so right. It's difficult, and there are so many factors, as you mentioned. Sometimes we just completely forget that if that person has a higher level of education in their primary language, right? That helps a little bit because they already understand the language, the structure, and how it plays role in different segments. So what do you do when you are teaching students, and you have been teaching for quite some time? You have a book written, and thank you so much for the gift. You sent me 10 copies of your book, and I want to show the viewers. These are signed copies, and I will keep one for myself, and the 9 copies are going to go to the clients and students who are a student at Empowerment Square. Thank you so much on their behalf and personally from me. But yeah, the question is, what is your approach? Like, how do you start, or how do you prime them to learn the language?
Every lesson, I've been teaching, this is my 25th year in public education, and 17 of the 25 years have been spent working with English language learners. And I've worked with and as well as adult learners. And so I have worked with literally every grade level from K through 12, in addition to parents of our English learners who want to learn the language, who don't get the opportunity to learn it in the workplace and are pursuing it outside of work. And when we start with our students, the first thing we want to figure out is what are their strengths. And we have 4 areas we're looking at: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. I have met people who are amazing at listening and speaking, but we put a piece of literacy in front of them and they really are challenged. I have had the opposite. I have had students who are wonderful readers and writers, but then if we put them into a situation where they're just listening and speaking, then they fall apart. And so we have students who have worked on part of it. We have students who are working on all of it. It just depends, right, on their history of education, their life experiences, if they've had any traumas to overcome, right? All of those things factor. into their ability for their brain to be ready to learn something new for an extended period of time. And so as we plan to prime them, the first thing we find out at is, what are they great at? And what do they feel they need support with? In addition to that, the second thing we do to prime students is we find out what their long-term goals are, especially at the high school level and the adult learner level. What is it that you want to do? What is it that you want to pursue? Do you want to go to community college, a university? Do you want to go to the military? Do you want to start your own business as an entrepreneur? Do you want to be a YouTuber? Do you want to go to a VOTEC or trade program because you want to learn a trade? What is your path look like to you for this chapter of your life? Right. And once we know that, then we can start to program for them accordingly. And so really, I think the two important pieces are finding out where your strengths are and needs academically, and then also taking the time to find out socially and emotionally, what is it that you want to pursue? And I think they're the two places that you start.
Okay, that is wonderful. And let's say if somebody is trying to become a YouTuber and they need to get good at their, language. They want to do English YouTuber job or, content creator. How does their journey start with you?
I think that something that I would say to them then is you better probably pursue all 4 skills. Because if you're going to be a social media influencer and you're going to be what now they call a content creator, right? You have to be able to reach a vast amount of audiences. So I would definitely pursue for them, at the college community level or locally, they have free classes, like for example, in our intermediate units where they have classes or in-person classes or a mix of both, or organizations like yours that are offering classes. You have to start to pursue a class to strengthen your speaking skills, to strengthen your listening skills. But at the same time, when you're a YouTuber, you would have comments, right? And subscribers that are going to be emailing you or making suggestions or asking for more content. So you also would have to strengthen your reading and writing skills because you want to be able to respond to them. Right. And social media changes so quickly. As a YouTuber, you want to be able to access and decide who your target audience is, and then learn the vocabulary of that particular field. So I would say you would have to really commit to being a lifelong reader, writer, because you want to keep growing and learning as your audience's needs change.
Wow. It's a big task.
It is. Yeah, for sure.
Wow. And so do you suggest a daily plan for, these activities to get better and make progress?
Yes. I mean, from an educator's perspective, we incorporate reading, writing, listening, and speaking to every lesson. If you are, are you talking about like a self-taught program or enrolling in a course?
Okay, that's a good question. Let's say self-taught program.
I would definitely, pursue online ELL courses, Teach Me English courses. There are a great amount of books out there that you can use to study. I'm looking over here because there's one I have called English Made Easy. That is a workbook style where you are practicing. And really when it comes to learning anything new, especially in a language, it's all about putting in the practice and the reps, right? Because you're not going to make a stronger muscle for yourself if you only do it once a week. If I only go to the gym once a week, it's going to take me a lot longer to get my body stronger. Yeah. Well, it's the same thing with your brain. You have to commit to, even if it's, 20 minutes a day, over a period of time, if you can enroll in a course, of spending time with that text, teaching yourself. Speaking of YouTube, thousands of videos out there of people who are teaching the language. There are programs you can enroll in on Zoom. So just start to take the time to inform yourself because information is power. And once you have information, you can make a decision about what path looks best for you.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. Because what we do is, folks who are enrolled in our program, we ask them, to record themselves on daily basis. They get their homework, right? Let's say 10 sentences to begin with, simple, easy introduction sentences. So they have to record themselves and listen back to, what they recorded and then be their own judge. What do they think about their level of speaking English or understanding, and how they pronounce the words in those sentences, and then next time go back and correct them and try to redo them for pronunciation, because they only work 1 hour a week with their coach, so that time is not as much to practice and correct everything, and practice over and over until you get perfect. So just go back and use Google pronunciation, like a Google pronounce tool, translate and pronounce, and try there. And I did that almost like for the past however many years, and I still use that tool. Just the other day, it's so funny that I was trying to say a sentence, and it had chaos erupts, right? And I didn't realize, I would never have any idea, like I could not pronounce erupts correctly. So I had to spend at least 5 minutes with Google pronunciation to correct myself. Like I would say it and Google would say like, nope, I can't recognize. You're not doing good enough job. So I kept going back and kept repeating myself and getting better. And eventually Google recognized what I'm trying to say. They gave me a green check mark, like, okay, now you are passed. Now you're good. So that is one thing that we have incorporated into our program for our ESL learners. What do you think about that?
I think that that's a wonderful tool. And there are lots of tools out there that can assist you in working towards reading, writing, listening, and speaking, like you're saying, like the Google tool that you mentioned. For example, I have a student who was required to write an essay for a class this week. And he is a newcomer. He is a level 1 student who speaks Mandarin and English. And we knew that he's not quite ready yet, or couldn't produce the most information if we just required him to write or fill in some sentences or use a word bank. So we used the Google Voice dictation feature. And that feature allowed him to click on the menu for tools, go down to Google Voice typing, and then he created, I was so incredibly proud of him, this amazing story, because he was able to speak Mandarin first, have it record in Mandarin and write it out for him, then translate it over into English, and then we were able to read it and fix it. Wasn't exactly perfect, right? But we were able to fix any grammar that we saw that was maybe a language difference, right? Some type of error in between both languages. But he created this incredible story they had to look at a photo and then create a story from the photo. And it had magic in it and wandering and this book on a library shelf. And every time a new person picked up the book, the story continued, dun, 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 right? And so could he have produced that if he didn't have that tool? Because there were so many good ideas, right, that were there. Exactly. No, he couldn't. And so his teacher and I made a huge deal out of it. We were jumping for joy, and he was really proud of himself because A, he was able to really show, right, what he could do in writing, and B, he was willing to use tools to help. And that's an important piece, I think, is like you're saying, listen to yourself speaking. Use the tool to help you. Right. Invest in the learning and know you're going to make mistakes. And all that is your brain is growing. That's all it is. Every single time. And guess what? We're all going to make more, and it's okay.
What we do is we encourage them to use tools such as ChatGPT, create story from there, get the help from ChatGPT, and then try to, go over and repeat that several times aloud, and then try to remember that story, like how you were thinking first, using very limited vocabulary that you have as a student, as a beginner, and then the story or the version that ChatGPT has given you, and then see, right? Read it aloud, try to memorize it, keep it short so you can memorize, and then try to say it out loud or tell the story in those words. And that makes a big difference for the students. What do you say about that?
It does. I think really what you're touching on there is what we call because I was a reading specialist for 10 years as well. And what it sounds like we're really touching on there is fluency, right?
Right.
So, being a fluent speaker, being a fluent reader. And so what you're touching on as well is called a repeated reading. And so, yes, that repeated reading, of listening to yourself read it over and over will allow you to increase your speed, your pacing, your pronunciation, and your understanding of what you're learning. And when we do it with our learners, we tell them we do that repeated read once a day. It just for time's sake, you time yourself, you give yourself 1 or 2 minutes, depending on the length of the piece, to time yourself reading it. And we only want you to get 1 word further than you did the day before. And we usually do those types of readings for about a week. And if it's a really particular complicated reading, maybe 2, right? But that repeated reading, that repeated practice will ingrain those words into your memorization, or the phonetics of them you will learn along the way, so that you could continue to become more fluent.
This is awesome. I love this, like how gradually, like you have to think gradual progress, right? You can't expect yourself to, make huge progress. For example, when, somebody is a beginner, English language learner, they want to, achieve big results in as short time as possible, right? Because we just want to get over that anxiety, that fear, whatever is, going on in our life while we're trying to speak English or, communicate in English. We're like, okay, I just want to get over, I'm going to get good in 1 week, or I want to get excellent in a month or so. But it's really the realistic approach is get 1 word further and time yourself. Because pacing and the speed plays big role, right? We might have the vocabulary back of our mind, but when it comes to using that vocabulary in everyday conversation, that is a challenge.
It is, and give yourself some grace to know that depending on where you live in the country, the pacing and the accent and the speed and the patience of when people speak and listen to you are going to differ. I lovingly say I come from Philadelphia. We're one of the fastest speaking, most impatient parts of the country. And so, listening to someone speak when I travel, people know I'm from Philadelphia pretty quickly. They'll say, "Oh, you're from Philly." And it's like, yes, they hear that accent, they hear the pacing, they hear the speed and the different vocabulary words, right, that I may use regionally. When I would travel to Georgia, I'll give an example. I was speaking to some teachers there and doing a training for them. And I said the word bath. And they said, "What?" I said, "Bath." And they were like, "Huh?" And I said, "Bath?" And they joked and they smiled. And I said, BATH, bath. And they were like, "Oh, you mean bath?" And I was like, "Yes." And we laughed together and we were doing this activity with it. But the point was that even regionally, people can struggle with the accent, the speed, and the pacing when you're born here and speak English as your first language. And so just giving yourself the space and grace to know that could differ, and you're going to have to practice.
Absolutely. That is another, great fun fact. But at the same time, everybody need to give themselves grace. You are learning a new language, and it's not an easy language, as you said in the beginning, and you must have patience with yourself. And
Really?
especially, some parents, their children are learning the language and they get impatient with their children because they don't understand themselves, like, okay, what is going on, where they are struggling, and it's not an easy process. Your brain changes a lot. It has to work a lot, juggle between so many different things, and have grace and patience for yourself, but continue working on improvement.
Absolutely, because you have to remember that you are physically changing your brain. You are building new circuits. Imagine wires, right, that are connecting. And that wire is going to take time to grow. And it's not going to be at the fastest current for the first, year or 2 as you're learning. And so you are literally, as a student, changing your brain. And that takes time.
Yeah, it's such a, interesting fact. For people, sometimes we don't take the time, or, we don't have the right kind of information to understand our own body, how it changes, especially when we are talking in terms of learning a new language or new behavior. Literally, our brains, they have these neural circuits. They are formed, right? And they get strong over time with repetition. So on bringing everything together is like, have grace for yourself, have patience, and keep keep learning, keep going, because every time you repeat the word or you repeat a sentence, you bring new vocabulary into your dictionary. Those circuits are going to get stronger and stronger, and that's how it becomes automatic.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, when a young child is learning to walk, how many times do they fall? How many times do they trip? How many times do they say, I'm not sure if I'm doing this? They don't just say, this isn't for me and quit. They have to learn to walk. And when you have made an intention for yourself, I'm going to learn this new language because I want to further my education, my job training, my opportunities. You have to commit to the idea, like you said, that I am going to repeatedly practice this and get up every time I fall, because this is what I decided is for me.
Exactly. So Andrea, I see that you are so passionate about teaching English as a new language, as a second language, and you have worked with so many people, from children to adults and everyone in between. And you have written the book on the stories that you have encountered in real time. What and how you became so passionate and invested in this particular field?
When I started out teaching 25 years ago, I was given what I call some of the toughest kids in the building. And at the time, they were 9th grade students. And I walked into school ready to teach and excited. I was hired 3 days after I graduated from college. And I walked into the classroom, and I was not an English as a new language teacher at that time. I was a high school English teacher for the general population. And I was given all these students, and they hated school. And I remember going home for that first few months and just crying every day and trying to understand what I could do differently or how to help them, because they hated school. And what I quickly figured out was that they didn't know how to read. And that was the reason that they hated school. They were illiterate. And so it really baffled me at the time, because I thought, I don't feel ready to teach them. I knew how to be an English teacher. I wasn't sure how to be a reading teacher. And so I went back to school and I earned a master's in reading. And I continued to work with these kids and other kids for the next 2 years. And as I started to work in the field of reading, I became a reading specialist. And I started to work with middle school students at the time who needed reading support. And it was then that I started to receive English language learners in my classes. And I started to get curious again, because I thought, I want new tools. I know how to work with students who need reading support, but how do I teach all 4 areas of reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and understand all of the layers that come behind every English learner who walks into my classroom? So I went back to school again, and I received my certifications as what we called an ESL teacher at the time. And so from that point on, I continued to work with amazing students at all grade levels. And about 10 years ago, I worked with one particular group of students, about 40 high school kids, and they came from all walks of life. I had students who were adopted. I had kids that had crossed the border. I had exchange students. I had kids who were born here, because most of our English language learners are now born in the US. I had students who waited for a visa and came after their parents. I had students who had a visa and came before their parents. So we had students coming in at the high school level with all different life experiences and all different proficiency levels. I had students who were brand newcomers who had never been to school. I had students who had went to private boarding schools in their country and walked in knowing 3 languages. So we had this wide range, right? And everybody in between of experience. So we had this classroom banner, and my banner said, education is opportunity. Education is freedom. What's your plan? Because our kids knew their only plan could not be, I'm going back to my country right now, or I'm going back to the state I just moved from, or I'm going back down the street to the neighborhood I just moved from. Because I would say to them, you have a gift that your parents and your teachers have given you. And that gift is the gift of being bilingual. And when you walk out of this program, that is what you are going to be. And you are not going to spend their time here with free education at this high school level by wasting it and not completing this plan. And so with that mentality, we would have this big banner up, and senior year is when they would sign this banner to celebrate that they had completed this chapter of their life's plan. And so really, most of my career has been spent as a support teacher, supporting educators, supporting kids, supporting adult learners, supporting families as they're acquiring the language with that mentality.
Wow. So really you start with the mindset, right? You help them get into that mindset that the failure is not an option.
Yep.
And being bilingual is a huge gift.
It is. And one of the ways we would remind them of that is we would bring alumni back who had already graduated from the program, and they would spend time talking to them. When they signed that banner that day, our alumni would walk in with a t-shirt for them, and it would say wherever they were headed next, whether it was college, university, Delaware, community college, like we mentioned, military, YouTuber, right? VOTAC, whatever it is, that alumni was responsible for bringing that celebratory shirt. And then they would sit and talk to them about all the things that are out there that are waiting for them now that they are young bilingual professionals ready to go out in the world. And I can give you a quick example. Just this week in my school, we had a student come in from a new place, but he was a kindergartner and he had some special needs. And he's never been to school. He's only been at home with mom. And he walked in the first day and he was in shock. He was running around the building. And he was really unsure about his new surroundings, and he couldn't communicate because he had never heard English before. But the good news is that there was a teaching assistant in the building who also spoke his first language. And when she came down into the building and into the classroom and started to speak to him in Arabic, you could see him relax. He could understand what was happening. And I said to her, I hope you tell every person you know that you are bilingual, because this is a gift that you have. This is an asset you have. And out in the business world and the education world, you should be celebrating that and listing it on every resume you have, because it is an asset.
What a powerful story. And my God, you see, most of the time, the bilinguals and who are, beginner or even intermediate English language speaking folks, whenever we start our conversation, most of the time, I had to work hard to get rid of this habit, but I hear a lot of people saying, I'm so sorry, my English is not that good. Right?
Yes. And it's so deflating as an English language learner teacher, because you already know more than the monolingual person that you're speaking to. And so instead of my English is not that good, it's, hey, I speak, I could list lots of languages. I speak Russian and I'm learning English, and just flip the script, right? Flip the script, because it's not, being a bilingual person should not be an apology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I learned that, very late, because in the beginning, because of the incidents I guess I had, because I was trying to, as I said, and this is a natural process, you are thinking, you are translating and you are speaking at the same time. It's a lot of work that goes into it. So as a beginner, you are trying to say as straightforward things, because I know in English you have to be super polite and add so many words like could I, please, this, kindly, all of that, right? And in the beginning you are hardly translating words from your language into English, and you are just saying, can you pass this to me? And that may sound very rude to some people who don't understand what this other person who is a bilingual is going through, how much struggle they have. And I had so many incidents where people would be like, my gosh, how could you be so rude, and the fights would erupt and everything. And I got like so shrink into my own shell, like, oh my gosh, I always, or most of the time, or sometime even offend other people. Maybe the best strategy is not talk, right? Or when I start the conversation, I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm learning the language. I'm not that good. So if I make a mistake, please consider that, right? So that apologetic approach. And then I see other people, and over time I realized, like, no, really, as you were saying, it's my strength.
It really is.
It's my strength, and everybody should know that I am bringing more to the table. If I'm working at an organization with a business, if they have customers or they have inquiries from those customers who speak my language, the language that we both speak, if they are having problem, I can come in and help them. So that should be
Yeah,
an asset instead of, and I speak good English, I understand English, so I'm not going to make mistakes. But at the same time, I also speak this other language. So they should consider me and this ability of mine as an asset instead of a weakness.
absolutely. I have a young man that said to me once, it's almost like a secret party trick. He said, I can turn my language on and off whenever I want. And I said, that is exactly right. You have a secret party trick that other people do not. And it is something that you have as an advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And this also happens, when we work with our clients and they get to a certain proficiency level, and now they are applying for different jobs. And those businesses, we try to collaborate with them and partner with them and brief them on, okay, this person who's coming into your organization, they are bilingual, they are still working on their English, but they understand perfectly and they are doing their best. So please accommodate them and, understand them that way. But there are not many businesses or organizations who would take the time and have the patience and grace to accept those individuals in their workforce. And that is a challenge that we are having in New York City, especially because we work with the population, who is local here in New York City. What would you say? I know you are passionate about that and you work in that area as well. How do you deal with that problem?
I think the first thing I would say to the business field is not giving someone the opportunity who's becoming bilingual to be a strength in your workforce is a huge mistake, because you have an opportunity as a business person in any field, business, education, whatever it may be, to expand the amount of people in the world that you can affect and talk to. And so what an opportunity for a business to grow, to start to offer, different services for their field. Just give people the time to learn, and you give them the supports within your business place to continue to strengthen those skills, because ultimately it's going to benefit everyone at the end. And so, are you providing your employees with opportunities to learn the language? Are you bringing in companies that could teach them English skills on site? Are you providing them with Zoom opportunities, whether it be maybe before work in the morning or after work in the afternoon or on their lunch period, or, whatever that may look like in the evenings? There are some great companies out in the world there that are willing to come in and support your employees who want to learn more about the language, which will ultimately improve your business opportunities. I think that for a business person to meet someone learning English and to make the assumption that lack of language equals lack of intelligence is a huge mistake, because there are so many concepts that a person could have a lot of experience in. They just haven't had the opportunity yet to gather all of the vocabulary and grammar and reading and writing and listening and speaking practice that they need to express it. And so always be thinking about, as a business person, I would take on as many bilingual applicants as I could, because as they acquire the language and I provide work supports to do that, or hire companies to come in and support us with that, you're going to grow your business.
Yeah, excellent message. Thank you so much for that. And also, if we think about it from a little bit, outside just the business or just the money aspect of it, we are all humans at the end of the day, right? Like any business person who's running a business, small, big, whatever, we are basically at the end of the day, trying to help human beings, whether they're the customers or your employees, right? So have that consideration as well, and have that grace and understanding and patience for those as well, that you are playing your part in helping them grow, by offering them this job opportunity and supporting them while they are on their growth journey. And imagine, like, those people are so committed, and whatever age they are lifelong learners. They are passionate about learning new language, and imagine if you give them opportunity, how else they can be so creative to bring more opportunities and growth to your business.
Absolutely. And the difference, between the adult learning world and the K-12 learning world is that, people will say sometimes to me, I can't believe this person never learned English. They've been here for 10 years and they've never learned it. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, because it's not free, right? Because when you're in they are busy working and providing for their family. and they are providing for their children, and they are maybe in coursework themselves, trying to get more educated, and funding is not limitless for people. And so unless there are opportunities for them to continue to acquire their skills in the workplace or in another opportunity within the county or the community, no, it's not going to be a priority that's on their daily list. Their priority right now is providing for their children, providing for their family, wherever they may be. When you have students in a K-12 setting, they're getting educated, quote unquote, for free because they're in the school system with an EL teacher that's providing the interventions, I don't want to say intervention because ELL is not an intervention, providing the support that they need to acquire the language. And so I think people forget that, and it's important to take that into consideration.
This is an excellent point because even if, let's say, some people would say like, oh, the resources are free, you can go out to local library and learn the English, but then you are sacrificing time when you could earn the livelihood for your family, and instead you're investing that time and ultimately, or in other words, that amount into learning the language. So definitely it's not free. Even if it looks like on the outside that it's free, it's really not free because that person is letting go that income that they could make or generate in that time, and instead they are going. And so and not everybody have those kind of resources and opportunities.
No, but there are amazing opportunities for people in the workplace to get to know their employees better by using interpretation services. We have, a great company called Language-Based Services that has 163 languages available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so anytime I need, we have 31 languages represented in my district. So anytime I have a parent on the phone that wants to communicate with the school, I can immediately get a live interpreter on the phone. A, that's a great opportunity for work for people who are bilingual, right? Because they are compensated well for that idea, working for that company. And B, it supports communication between the school and the family because now we're able to team up. You could take the same approach in the business place when you interview someone and you know that they are learning English. Why not interview them in their first language with an interpreter? So you can really gauge an idea of what their knowledge is, their knowledge base and their skills and the concepts they've learned and the life experiences that they've had. Why not provide that opportunity in the workplace in the beginning as you're interviewing someone to get to know what they can do? Because there's a lot more that they can say in their first language at that point necessarily than in the new one. And so just supporting the transition, there's a great text service called Talking Points that you can communicate in back and forth. There are tons of them out there, but just be willing to explore them as you hire people.
Wow, Andrea, you have so many excellent ideas that I'm just loving that. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I never heard anyone talk about it, that when you are interviewing a bilingual potential employee, why not use the interpretation services, translator services, and interview them in their native language, right? Their first language. You will know their potential, and maybe that's when you can start investing more in that employee, and over time you can create a loyal employee, right, who would really take your business to the next level and be there for you. This is wow. Now,
absolutely. And as a person who's learning the language, don't be afraid to request it. Don't be afraid to walk into the opportunity and say, I can share with you a lot, but I can share more with you if you're willing to provide an interpreter for our meeting. And I always encourage that too as a parent. If many of the adult learners are parents, always know that access to language is not a privilege for some, it's a right for all. And so it's important that you as a parent always make that request. If you prefer a language other than English to communicate with your school, because you are the best resource to share about your child, it is okay for you to go to the school and say, I am requesting an interpreter, or I am requesting that these school documents be translated and sent home in this language that I prefer to read and write it, because it is a right and it's important that parents are aware of it.
Wonderful. Yes. Know your rights and use them. Right? For your benefit. Yeah, absolutely. The resources are there. And if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So ask for help, ask for resources, and use those resources. This is wonderful. You are a real educator, Andrea.
Thank you. I'm lucky
So,
to get to do what I do.
yeah, that's beautiful. So what else do you do? I know you're an educator, you go do workshops, teach other, people, you are a public speaker, keynote speaker. How's that journey going and how did you incorporate that? And you have written a book. What was all of that?
So the group that I was talking about earlier, about 10 years ago that I worked with, those 40 students, I had one particular group I worked with that was a family, and they were the Lopez family. And I worked with all 7 of their children over time. And there were all boys and one girl. And they happened to be from the country of Salvador. And we started with Sergio and Jeffrey and Henry and Jeffrey from Las Vegas. And we worked our way all the way down to Nancy, who was the only female in the family. And I taught all that the group of students and the family, and they all graduated from our What's Your Plan mentality. And they signed that banner and went on to start the second chapter of their lives post high school. And about a year after that, I'd finished working with the Lopez's, I was teaching one day and there were a bunch of helicopters outside. And I was like, wow, I hope everything's okay. There's a lot of helicopters outside today. And about an hour after I had that thought, my principal came down to get me to let me know that one of my students had been hit by the train. And unfortunately, that student was Nancy. And unfortunately, she died that day. You see, she had a pair of headphones on and she made a decision to walk along the inside of the train tracks. And as she walked along the inside of the tracks, she was clipped from behind by the Acela. And at that time, it threw our community, our students, our teachers, Nancy's family into a huge sense of trauma. And one of the most challenging parts of that day was that when mom and dad received the call that something had happened to one of the kids, no one on the local force spoke Spanish. And so they kind of knew that something was wrong, and they kind of knew that something had happened to one of the kids, but they didn't know which one it was. And so they were calling the school and trying to get to us. And for hours, they went up to those train tracks and they were standing there waiting and calling their children to figure out who had passed away. And so from that experience, we went into the next few weeks and we were helping mom and dad navigate the funeral process. They were learning English themselves. We were navigating the language barrier. We were navigating immigration. We were asking for her brother to be allowed to come back and bury his sister, which he was denied. They were navigating the Latino community who was showing up every night with chairs to sit with the parents as they went through this time. And so one of my jobs at the time was to speak at her funeral. And so at the time I wrote this short poem and I called it Take Me Home. And it was an homage to Nancy's life experiences in crossing into the US. And so I read that at her funeral and I continued to teach these amazing kids. And I let that piece of paper sit on my desk with this poem on it. And one day I thought, well, maybe something about this story could be helpful to someone. And so I sent that little poem out on a whim to a bunch of publishers. And a few months later, a publisher gets back to me and they're like, hey, Andrea, we really like your poem, but we don't want you to write a poem. We want you to write a book. And we're going to give you 6 months to do it. And if you come back with something we like, we'll take you on and publish. And I started to think to myself, well, I don't just want to tell her story. I want to tell all of their stories because they are so different. And all the young people that I was working with at the time were coming into the classroom upset about a lot of assumptions that were being made about them. Right. For example, my students would come in and they would say, Miss B, why does everybody keep calling me Mexican? I'm not from Mexico. I'm from Colombia. I'm from Salvador. I'm from Ecuador. I'm from Brazil. I'm from Spain. I don't even know anyone in that country. Or other kids would come in and say, Miss B, everybody here knows I'm from Africa and they keep asking me if I live with lions. Why would people ask me that? I went to a private boarding school in a city. Or other kids would come in and say, I'm wearing a hijab to represent my religion and my culture, and people are really laughing at me. And so it was from these experiences I was watching them have outside of the EL classroom that convinced me to have something to say. And so I went back and I found 11 of my former students who were in their late 20s, early 30s. And I spent about 6 months interviewing them. And I said to them, I know that we did a great job handling your challenges, celebrating your wins, helping you have success in your school experiences here with our team of teachers. But now that you're a young bilingual professional person living and working out in the world, and you can reflect back upon your school experiences, what was that really like for you? And so from those conversations, we tried to hit almost every continent, and we tried to hit almost every experience that we had lived through and talked about. And so we created Take Me Home. It's the true story. It's our true story of 11 of my students who share what it was like to become bilingual in America. And it's written in English. It also repeats in Spanish within the same book. But every chapter is written in the first person from their perspective, and all of their names have been changed to names of strength. So we have names like Bolt and Charge and Fuel and Grit and Embrace. And we also knew it was really important to include the perspective of someone who was born here, because most of our students were. And so we have a young man from Wilmington, Delaware, who was willing, he's from Peru, who was willing to share his story. So we put all of that together, and this book released in July of 2021 from the publisher. And then all of a sudden, schools started to read it, teachers started to read it, adult learners started to read it, future teachers started to read it, middle school students and high school students started to read it all around the world. And I started to get these calls of people would say, hey, will you come talk to our teachers? Will you come talk to our business place? I had business leaders who were reading it to gain a better perspective of all of the assets that their workforce is bringing to the table. And so I said, sure. So here I am, right? Still teaching. I'm still teaching today. It's been, now we're coming into 2020. We're in 2025. So for the past 4 years, I have been still teaching and getting to travel the country, talking to all of those stakeholders about these amazing, not only our true story, but these amazing young people that they get the opportunity to interact with. And then I've been training teachers on how to best reach, teach, connect, communicate, and collaborate with English language learners and families. In addition to that, I've also gotten to contribute to some other books in the EL field with Dr. Andrea Honixfeld about collaboration with teachers and EL teachers and beyond and beyond. But it's been quite a journey so far, and I'm very proud of it.
Congratulations, Andrea, on this beautiful and powerful journey, and what a beautiful, book that you have created, telling the stories of everyone who is going through this journey. And I'm sure so many others can relate with that. And offering it as a resource, for all the business owners over there, or the managers of the business, who want to understand this, and they want to empower their employees who are bilinguals, or they are speaking other languages. And that is a great resource. That is their strength. And if they are able to see that through your book, it's a huge service to the community, from all over the world. So I thank you for that, and thank you for sharing your journey and spending this time with us. Do you have any last minute advice for our listeners?
I think that the best thing that you could remember is that nobody achieves success alone. And so be willing to be vulnerable, be willing to join a community, be willing to make mistakes, be willing to get up every time you feel unsuccessful, and continue to surround yourself with people who uplift you, with people who are stronger than you, and people who want to see you win in life. And if you can do that, you will be successful no matter what.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this powerful advice. I hope everybody can take something from this conversation, and especially this advice that Andrea shared with all of us at the end of it. Thank you so much, Andrea, once again. And where can people connect with you online? If you want to mention your resources, please.
Absolutely. So you can find me on our website, which is andreabitnerbooks.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Andrea Bitner. And Twitter. I am also Andrea Bitner on Twitter as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us for this powerful conversation. And I hope you learned so much. And if you are on your journey to learning English, stay strong. It takes a lot of courage, devotion, and time on everyday basis to, get to the goals that you have for yourself in terms of your learning the language. And if you haven't already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do subscribe. If you like this conversation, give us a thumbs up and press the bell icon, and I will see you in the next episode. Until then, stay strong, chase your dreams, and live with passion.